It's very yes.
Well, welcome, guys. Good afternoon. Are you all feeling excited? If not, well, I'll try to help with that. I feel excited. Let me close the door real quick. If you're wondering why there is a peeping Tom over here in the corner, this is Ashley, and she's a colleague of mine at the clinic that I work at, and she's graciously agreed to wear a head cam for the first 30 minutes of this class. It's like a little bit of, every single workshop I offer, there are people in Germany that are like, why aren't you doing web classes? And I was like, that's a lot of work, but at least maybe we can do like a little live stream for a few minutes at the beginning of the class while I'm telling you guys what it's about. And so, I hope it doesn't mess with your sense of local reality. Here we are, I assure you.
You're gonna have a stiff neck.
We'll see how it goes.
She's also demonstrating a slump test. She's Ashley's Durham honor is in a wonderful position. Let's see what happens. This is Fascia Science 1, entitled Bones, Bubbles, and Sheets. And it's the first of 3 classes that I'm doing. I used to do this in one day and found that it was utterly impossible. And so this is an experiment in a few ways in terms of how to structure this material, because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to fascia and connective tissue, because it's at the center of all these different body systems. It really connects to a lot of different models of physiology and of treatment. So roughly divided, I thought we would take today's class, to really talk about the architecture of human connective tissue, how it connects to itself and to other things, and then try and talk about how that lands in our practice. Next Friday, we're going to talk about the nervous system interface with connective tissue. So it's going to be about fascia and the nervous system's regulation of self. How do I distinguish myself from other things? How do I know the distribution of me in space? How do I extend my sense of self into objects that I'm using? And how does this show up on the table, right? Because as a body worker, we have had evidence for years that something in human touch is actually blurring a self-other distinction, And for me, it's one of the most profound moments in my practice is that wordlessly I am co-experiencing a spot in the body with the person on the table, right? And it's like this one, whatever it is we're contacting, there's 2 nervous systems interfacing with that spot. And that's a pretty cool thing. And it seems like we have therapeutic effects with that, even if we have no other intent, but just to contact it and bear witness to it, right? What's going on there? Could we do it with more intention, right? In the 3rd week, we're going to talk about how the fascial system participates in defense and in danger signaling. So this is all about pain and inflammation, and how acute patterns of pain and inflammation arise, and how they may or may not resolve, right? So this is a class where we get to talk about adhesions and what they are, what we can reasonably ascertain with our palpation versus a surgical exploration or something like that. And also what we can reasonably hope to do as body workers in treating inflammatory processes, pain processes, adhesive processes in the connective tissues. So that's roughly speaking what the 3 classes are about. And today is all about the architecture. It's all about the beginnings of what is the shape of this, and especially what have we learned of late in terms of the shape of fascia, because presumably you guys all have some pre-existing notion of this. I think it's a really, really exciting time to take in some information about connective tissue, about fascia. It is, as you know, it's the challenge of our age. How do we integrate the amount of information that's coming at us? It's crazy, right? It's crazy, and there's no way to do it, actually. You know, somebody made some, you know, probably made up statistic that if you spent 3 hours a day, every single day, reading every paper you could in the field of your choice, the medical subfield of your choice, by the end of a year, you would be 10 years behind, you know, or something like that, right? So there's no hope. You can't do it all. Best we can do is to try to key into the big patterns and get the tidbits that seem most relevant to what's really compelling to us, which is creating a compelling change in the state of health of the person in our care. So there's a lot of reasons to talk about this stuff. What I'm going to try to do today is to key you into some things that I have noticed from attending fascia research congresses, from reading a lot, and from witnessing a lot of acrimonious Facebook debates. I wish I had those hours back in my life, but, and I hope it goes well. So this is not going to be a class about like going through one research paper, but I'm happy to. I will be sending you guys a reference list, so I'm happy to have this serve as an entry point for you guys as well. Why study this stuff? I start with the risky question of why are you even here? Don't worry, to mitigate the risk, I've brought my own teacher apple. So you can't hurt my feelings.
It has so much to do with our movement or lack thereof.
Right, so it's everywhere, right? So because connective tissue and fascia, we'll differentiate those terms in a sec, permeates us at every level of organization, it is likely to be involved with everything we do, right? We're going to find a role for fascia and connective tissue in every physiologic process. So that's one good reason, is that it's really always playing a role, and sometimes it plays a really pivotal role. Other times maybe not, right? But it's worth studying on that account. Right? So that's one thing. It's there. We are interested in the body. It's part of every part of the body. Why else?
I interviewed I'm afraid of purpose, but I interviewed at a place, and one of the people that I was interviewing training with said, I like deep tissue, I'm not into all that fascial work. And I didn't really think I wanted to work there anymore, but
yeah.
And there seems to be a delineation, and I just need to know more about this. And if I can help other people understand that, it's not divided like that.
All right, so what you're keying into here, so one thing, just to keep track, hey, it's everywhere, right? And because we're interested in the body, fascia is a pretty good thing to be interested in. Another thing, I think what you're keying into is that we have this convoluted culture and history as body workers of attaching modalities to the concept of fascia and saying, and then we begin to say, it's a really bad language basically. So we say, I'm into deep tissue, but not into fascial work, and nobody knows what that means. Nobody knows what that means, right? it might correspond to, for some people, fascial work might be very deep pressure and very intense experience. For some people, it might be a very sort of light unwinding or some contemplative experiment, barely touching the body, right? So there's a lot of connection to modality. A lot of people, myself included, are teaching continuing ed workshops with the word fascia in the title, and sometimes that creates more confusion than clarity, right? Even if it's my intent to work with fascia, am I working with fascia? Who knows, right? And there's a big scientific debate about that. So there's a lot of folks who are more on the skeptical end of the spectrum who say, enough with all this fascia stuff. It's not as important as everyone thinks, right? And more to the point, because fascia connects to everything, almost everybody can use it as an explanatory model for whatever, right? Which means that there's a lot of folks who say this is fascial work, and what they're talking about is describing their intent. Nothing wrong with that, but they're not necessarily describing a real thing happening in the body. And we need to begin to sort of, without saying you're good, you're bad, you're scientific, you're pseudo-scientific, we need to be able to peel this apart as body workers and talk about, here is my intention. Here is what I can reasonably know about this body on the table. And here is what I don't really know. Here's what it feels like. Those are all valid things, but we need to have a little more subtle language, in my opinion. So, does fascia explain every effect that we see, right? When a tissue goes from to bleh, is that best explained by some mechanism of connective tissue? Is that explained by a change in the state of collagen in relation to surrounding molecules? Is that explained by a piezoelectric process in collagen? Is that better explained by a nervous system response, right? That's a really interesting thing that happens. You're contacting the body. There is a restricted state in the tissues. It says, no, okay. Really interesting, right?
So would you say that the answer to all of those questions was yes? Even if you don't remember what they all were? I mean, it has to do with all of those things, it sounds like.
I would say, I think we need to raise our standard a little bit as clinicians and say, not just is it a plausible model, but is there evidence, is there positive evidence for this effect occurring, right? So if I'm thinking like a scientist, nature plays tricks on scientists all the time. There's all kinds of ways in which the body is more complicated and more tricky than we thought it was, right? For centuries and centuries. In the 1600s, Descartes, who was a brilliant thinker and a brilliant anatomist, naturally, because this was the concept available to him, thought that nerves were hydraulic tubes, and that the way that the brain actuated the movement of the fingers was by little pressure impulses going down the nerves. Why? That was the most advanced technology at the time, was hydraulic tubes, hydraulic systems. If you pierce a nerve, it oozes a pressurized fluid. It'll go, and then a little fluid will come out. So he thought, well, here's all this stuff. There was no concept of electricity. There was no concept of of like electrical potential in ionic solutions or anything like that. So Descartes said hydraulic system. It would have been a perfectly reasonable thing for the body to be doing. It just happened not to be doing that. Now, as a body worker, I have to say, I have to like hold some space for the fact that it is not a weakness of our profession that we are willing to play with image in our work. It's not a weakness of our profession that we're comfortable with uncertainty, right? After every other clinician that somebody has gone to see doesn't really listen to them, doesn't really listen to their story, doesn't really connect with their state of mind, and requires and is satisfied, let's say, by an intellectual explanation of what's going on, even at the expense of the person's well-being. You know, a radiologist might say, look, I got you a scan. It's brilliant. It's a rigorous technology. I can show you hernia disc, hernia disc, hernia disc. And the person naturally experiences more pain after that event, right? As body workers, we have a little bit more comfort with uncertainty. We can say, I'm going to put my hands on your body. I'm going to find out the information that will assure me a relative degree of safety, right? Mm-hmm. And we'll see. And we'll see. This is what it feels like to me. This is what it feels like. That's an okay thing to say. But if you're switching to a scientist perspective, we're going to raise our standard a little bit and say, we don't know, right? There's a lot of things we don't yet know, and it's okay. So there's lots of reasons to study fascia just because it's interesting. It's interesting. We don't need to pin it to some clinical effect necessarily. It's worth learning about just because it's fascinating, right? If I have you look at this image, there's a picture of fascia in this image. Not only is it interesting to me, it's beautiful. To me. What do you notice about these images?
Despite one being in color and clearly a different imaging method, there's a lot of similarities between the two.
A lot of similarities, right? So you're seeing two systems of like web-like connections, right?
But in 3 dimensions too.
It's 3D. It's a dense interconnection. Some connections are strong, some connections are weak, and importantly, there are areas of no connection or less connection. So to give you that, to update our credo, it's all connected. Let us henceforth say, I give you a new commandment. Okay? It's all connected, but some things more than others, right? That's what makes that's interconnection. Strong connections here, less connections there. Same thing in the body. In order to function well, some things in the body need to be disconnected, and fascia accomplishes that just as well, right? Now I have to tell you that only one of these pictures is of human connective tissue, and it's this one. This is a micrograph of collagen fascia. Right? This is the largest current model of the known universe. And so these clusters here are all clusters of galaxies, right? And our galaxy is somewhere in this little pocket here called the Virgo supercluster, right? So just one tiny galaxy, barely visible on this thing. And what we have now thus far observed about the greatest extent of space in the universe is that gravity connects galaxies in these filaments, right?
So the Milky Way would be one of those filaments.
The Milky Way is just arranged along a gravity line.
In one fiber in one tiny little filament.
Be one fibroblast resting on a fiber. Right? We're going to do our metaphor. So notice what I'm doing here. I'm giving you an image, and I'm not telling you that this is a clinical theory.
Well, they never really are connected somewhere.
And I'm not making a scientific assertion. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Wow.
That's reason enough to study fascia for me. Right? Connective tissue. How things connect in nature. There's something there that seems to speak to me to say there's a mystery there. Things, matter arranging itself in patterns of connection. So if that's what does it for you, great. And if not, we'll get to some more practical things.
It looks sticky, is it? Fascia?
This stuff? Oh yeah.
It looks sticky.
Proteins are sticky by nature. They tend to be big, sticky molecules. They tend to have lots of hydrogens on their surface that bristle outward and form hydrogen bonds. So the same way that Elmer's glue glues things together, that's hydrogen bonding. And Elmer's glue is just ground up collagen tissue, you know. So yes, sticky. Fascia is sticky. So other than the fact that fascia is interesting, I think there are meaningful ways in which learning about fascia can impact our clinical practice, right? There's ways in which I think this information today will give you a different way of experiencing and navigating the body work that you're doing. Are we all massage therapists, body workers?
Well, I like what you said earlier about it. We need to increase the rigor of the way we talk about this. I mean, I think most of the way I learned to talk about adhesions, for example, is just passed down to me by one instructor or another or a classmate, and there's not really any certainly scientific thinking behind it, much less anything evidence-based.
Right. And, almost every assertion that we have made as body workers and as bodywork teachers. I was a teacher in the massage school for years. If I had to list the number of things that I said that now I would not say, I'm sorry.
If asked to substantiate your statement, you would be at a loss for many of those statements.
Right, and sometimes it's like, there is such a thing as, there really is, it's really okay to be working along, and somebody asks you that question. That's the most common question that I get as a body worker from somebody on the table. Hey Mike, what are you on right now? Right? And I have to say, it used to be a lot easier to answer that question. Because I was very confident about what I was on. I am on your gastrostomy units. Oh, well, thank you for asking. I'm on your anterior scaling. I'm on your longest catheters. And now I have to say, I'm on your skin. I'm on your arm. I can tell you 8 things that are in my head that I'm over right now, right? Lots of layers, but there's not one thing I'm on. I'm on everything, and I'm on, So I can't, if I'm being really honest, I don't know anymore. Right? I can tell you lots of things.
It's interesting. One of my exam questions when I took my boards was from vertebra T3 outward towards the skin. You list all the structures that you cross, and I think they were mostly looking for muscles. Never occurred to me to list any of the fascial layers involved.
Right. Well, we'll get there today. So that's really exciting. Fascial layers, right, as meaningful elements of structure, things that if we have them in our image bank, all of a sudden they appear under our hands, right? That's the essence of palpation. Palpation is a combination of what's there and what you're looking for. It's nothing magical about what we do in massage school, PT school, etc. when we teach people palpation. We have them touch bodies, look at pictures. Touch bodies, look at pictures. And then we throw, because that might seem too boring to people, we give them exam questions and things like that. But really what we're doing is we're saying, get sensory input and then feed your image bank, feed your spatial awareness. And so then 3 months into school, you're contacting the back of a leg and it no longer feels like a hunk of meat. It feels like a gastrocnemius and a semimembranosus and etc., right? The same thing is possible in today's inquiry. You can touch that back of the leg and you might say epidermis, superficial fascia, investing fascia, right? Periosteum. These images, once they're in there, can be contacted more meaningfully, let's say, than if they weren't in there in the first place. Okay? So there's a good reason to have some sense of the architecture of fascia, is that it shows up like magic under your hands. So I'll just have you guys, without answering it, just ponder this question for me. What is fascia? Right? And I want you to think of this question in terms of what a person on your table would ask you. Hey, I heard this term fascia. What is that anyway? And just, you can either write this down or just think to yourself, what's my answer to that question? What's my current answer? Doesn't have to be the best answer, but what would you say to somebody in session about what is fascia? It's a good time for me to answer that question to myself. And then let me just flash in front of you, don't worry, there's an end to that sentence. Let me just flash in front of you 3 catchphrases that we're going to return to later. And I just think to yourself, what does this currently mean to you? So, one catchphrase, balance is a verb. No need to write this down, but just think, does that mean something for how you practice bodywork, how you look at bodies, right? How you advise people in movement? Balance is a verb. Second catchphrase, work with the interface. Another way to say that is work with the place where 2 things meet. Third catchphrase, we'll get back to this one as well. Move at the speed of release. Or move at the speed of change. There's a certain tempo that we can sometimes perceive in the body. Okay. So, you guys still doing okay? Feel free to interrupt me anytime I say something that doesn't make sense. Why do I call this class Bones, Bubbles, and Sheets? It's because if we're looking at what is the basis of the structure of us, I would have to say you began as essentially two things. You began as water and balloon. You were a water balloon when you started, right? First a single cell, and then you were a few thousand cells, which was a blastocyst, another water balloon. You were a double-chambered balloon that began to form a primal midline, right? And now here is this double-chambered balloon, right? And at this stage, you have the precursors to all of the connective tissues that you are going to have for the rest of your life. You have an ectoderm here, right? This is the back, presently the back of this organism. You have this central midline, right? And a mesoderm, which, notice it forms the middle layer here, but the mesoderm is presently wrapping around both the other tissues, right? And then you have this endoderm, which is forming this early sort of gut tube. Right? If you want to know when fascia first came into existence on this planet, it was around the Cambrian explosion. This is maybe 400 million years ago, and it was when you had basically jellyfish before then. Different kinds of organisms. That's all there was on the planet Earth. And those organisms had just ectoderm and endoderm. They just had squishy nerve tissue and squishy organ tissue. They had no really dense connective tissue. And then something happened during that Cambrian explosion, the biggest explosion of life on this planet Earth. All of a sudden, you had trilobites, and you had critters like horseshoe crabs, and you had things with teeth and jaws, and you had central nervous systems. You had bilateral symmetry. You had hunters and hunted. You had increasing arms rates of complexity when it came to behavior, when it came to foraging. And so the difference between jellyfish and horseshoe crabs, right? That switch happened pretty quickly in evolutionary time. And what attended that change was connective tissue, fascia. That's what made it possible to have a central nervous system, to have muscles as such, to have joints, right? To have shells and bones and teeth and jaws. Pretty cool, right? So, so here you are, a jellyfish that has been imbued with a special power, and it lets everything else come into being. There's your bubble, and you will notice that there are bubbles, pressure cavities, that make up an essential part of our structure at every level of organization, right? When you press into the skin and feel it push back, it's because of millions of tiny pressurized bubbles that are resisting your compression and pressing you back. When you walk around and you think about the stability of your lumbar spine, you know, you really have to think, what's the primary thing stabilizing this column? It's not the bones and joints. It's the bubble of your abdomen. Right? And the better this bubble can support that lumbar spine, the less work the local joints have to do. Right? The more stability, buoyancy the person experiences. Now we get to, so let me briefly have you guys turn to page 1 of your handout. Ashley, you good with like a couple more minutes here?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. After the next break, I'll show you guys a little video of fibroblasts in action. Fibroblasts are amazing. They're little sweet potato-shaped cells, at least in a petri dish. They're in this little picture on the corner here. And their whole job is regulating the content and the tension of connective tissues. And so if you have a population of fibroblasts just sitting on a glass slide, and then you take a little stirring rod and you scrape it across the slide, create a gash in those fibroblasts. Within minutes, you'll see the fibroblasts go, there's a gap. Everybody subdivide, everybody migrate. And you'll see fibroblasts clambering over each other like harbor seals, trying to get to that gap, trying to divide and trying to stretch out and grab hold of each other again to close that gap. Why? Because they like to be in a resting state of tension with each other. They like to have tensional stability. And if they don't sense it, they climb around and grab onto things and pull tight again until they have it. They are connective cells, and they're always eating and depositing little chunks of protocollagen. They're always trying to regulate the matrix that everybody else lives in. Right? And they change their own shape depending on the need. We'll get more into their behavior. But the fibroblasts are spitting out things that end up forming collagen fibrils, right? And collagen links up with with a number of surrounding molecules, basically long chain sugars and things like high hyaluronan, that the kind of slimy stuff, ground substance in connective tissue, to make bubbles and sheets, right? What's the difference between a bubble and a sheet is the arrangement of fibers. A bubble has pretty much irregular fibers, right? And a sheet can be either irregular or it can be arranged in parallel. Okay, so let's now differentiate what we mean by fascia, because we use this term a lot, and it actually tends to have at least 3 different meanings. And this is, I think, on the second, we can begin on the second page of the handout here. We're going to talk about sort of proper fascia, what anatomists would call fascia. We're going to talk about a slightly larger category of fascia, and we're going to talk about all sort of fibrous connective tissues in the body. So, firstly, let's say we're talking about proper fascia. What we mean by proper fascia is membranes of irregular connective tissue. So not parallel fiber membranes, but fibers going every which way in a sheet, right? Irregular, membranous connective tissue. Okay. If you have to use a saran wrap metaphor, there it is, right? Proper fascia, the stuff that wraps other things. So every gross anatomical structure has a proper fascia that relates to it, right? The proper fascial layers that wrap around the central nervous system are the meninges, right? The proper fascia that wraps around the heart is the pericardium, etc.
Everything that begins with peri.
I'm sorry?
Everything that begins with peri.
Not yet willing to say that. There's a lot of peris in the body.
At least periosteum and perivicine.
Yes, both of those are forms of proper fascia. there's this other term that you may not have heard before, but it's a useful term to know. Regular dense connective tissue. There's a section for this on the next page. You don't need to write down this term. Regular dense connective tissue is collagen fibrous tissue that is arranged in parallel arrangement. Regular dense connective tissue, right? So, if I'm talking about paramycium around a muscle, that's a form of fascia. If I'm talking about the tendon at the end of that muscle, that's a regular dense connective tissue, right? So if the fibers look like this, all going in one way, ligaments, tendons, aponeuroses, joint capsules, the linear layer of a joint capsule. Joint capsules are interesting because they have a layer that's proper fascia and they have a layer that's regular dense connective tissue. These are forms of RDCT, regular dense connective tissue. And sometimes we say fascia to mean both of these, right? Somebody says, is the IT band a form of fascia? You might say, well, not under this definition. The IT band, such as it is, dissected out from everything else, the IT band that we imagine in pictures with that muscle man, is a regular dense connective tissue. Okay? But there's a reason beyond lack of education why sometimes we mean both when we say fascia, the broader term fascia. And it's because when you actually try to dissect these out from each other, what you realize is that they blend into each other, right? You can think of this like a generalized tissue in the first case, and a more specialized outgrowth of this tissue in the second, right? So remember we said, we said the IT band, if you dissected it out and just looked at just that layer, regular dense connective tissue. But the IT band is a winding together of a lot of fasciae that form that fibrous expansion. Right? This is sometimes a term you see in the Stecko's literature is fibrous expansions, a form of fascia that then winds itself into a regular dense connective tissue. What you will find, and what we'll talk about a bit when we get to next class and we talk about the nervous system as it relates to fascia, is you will find very, very interesting mechanoreceptors located at the interfaces between fascia and regular dense connective tissue. When a ligament grips onto a bone and then merges with the periosteum, it's that transition zone that is probably worth our attention. So proper fascia, regular dense connective tissue. And then sometimes when we say fascia, we are really talking about all fibrous connective tissue. Right? We're talking about these two, the membranes and the regular dense arrangements, but we're also talking about loose connective tissue. Like imagine you had two layers two layers of proper fascia, but between them was a bunch of fuzz, right? The Velcro stuff, that's loose connective tissue, right? It's really not in a layer of fascia, it's the stuff in between layers of fascia. Sometimes people will talk about an extracellular matrix. Right? A form of fibrous connective tissue. not a proper fascia, but when we say fascia is everywhere in the body, what we're talking about is we're including that kind of fibrous connective tissue, the thing that as is true, when I place my fingers on the skin and take the skin in a direction, I can say reasonably that this little move on the skin is tugging on the superficial fascia. It's tugging on the loose connective tissue that anchors the superficial fascia to the deep fascia. It's tugging on the deep fascia that grips into the perimysium and the endomysium, etc., into the individual muscle cells. And I know through the extracellular matrix that matrix connects into integrin molecules that go right into the cells. So in some meaningful way, I can say the mechanical force I impart on the outside of the body is touching every layer of this body, right, down to the cells. So what I would say is, just be aware that fascia might mean a very broad thing or a very specific thing when you read through a research article on this. For right now, we will be employing mostly this definition: proper fascia, membranes, right? Where necessary, we will include regular dense connective tissues where they play a real role, right? Right now, we will try to differentiate those from like the fibrous tissues that go all the way down into the cells, the extracellular matrix, etc. You could even say blood is a potentially fibrous connective tissue, right? Because in the vein, in the artery, blood is liquid, but if you open up a vein or artery, immediately blood becomes fibrous because it forms clots, right? So blood is always waiting to become fibrous any moment that you pierce a vessel. So things like scar are also in that broadest category of fibrous connective tissue. Things like clot, right? Just to make our discussion easier, we'll keep it to the first two for the most part. So let's talk about proper fascia and talk about the kinds of proper fascia that you find in the body. And we can say goodbye to planet Earth. Thank you very much.
All right.